All right, guys. I'm going to go through and do a timeline from of the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, and basically what we did was we just finished talking about the fall of Rome in our last unit. Well, in core knowledge, we jump around a lot. We don't do like chronological history a lot, so we're basically jumping from about 476 to about the 15 and 1600s. Okay, the Enlightenment was the 1600s and the 1600s and the 1700s. So we're jumping a large distance. Well, before we do that, let me give you a little bit of an idea of what we're jumping over. Okay, so basically. I have listed on here. Basically, a lot of times people say the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages are the same thing. Well, that's a generalization, yes. But the Dark Ages were the first section or the first part of the Middle Ages, and that was from 476 into about 1000. Okay, and when people actually we could even say 1066 here, and I'll explain that more in detail later. People want to just make these big generalizations when it comes to that time period. The Middle Ages, probably from 1000 to about the 1400s, and basically the idea of the Middle Ages ending and then this new beginning or this new birth in history. What basically ended that time period was the end of, do you remember studying the feudal systems when you guys were in fourth grade? And you guys probably, I think your teachers assigned you, like some of you were serfs and peasants. Some of you were like dukes and landowners and things like a gentry. Yeah, exactly. And okay, so that basically, that system, as that system started to die out, that is when you saw this rebirth of history. And that rebirth is called, it's an R word, the Renaissance. Okay, good. And really, the Renaissance, one of the things that happens during this time period in this Renaissance, and it really is leading into a rebirth. Excuse me. Wow, that was scary. Okay. So, the Gutenberg Press, okay, the printing press. Well, how in the world does that change anything? What's the big deal? It's just a printing press, right? Well, think about this. The vast, 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 vast majority of people could not read before 1444, okay? Like if you ran across somebody who was reading or who could read, they were probably super rich or they were part of the church, okay? So most villages, whoever could read, it was probably the priest in the village, okay? And if he could read, what book did they have in the village? The Bible. What else did they have? Nothing really. They might have a couple scrolls, things like that. But for the most part, that books were very much a rarity because you had to handwrite every book. Imagine having to handwrite a book.
We do that like every day.
No, you don't. Not even close. Not even close. A lot of monks at the time, and basically the only people who were writing books at the time were monks. Adler, you ready? Okay. Most of the time, these people who wrote, they were monks, and the books wouldn't be like our little book here. That little tiny book that Adler has right there in front of him. If somebody had to handwrite that, it'd probably be this thick, okay, and probably this wide. So imagine having to, that'd be a pretty big textbook, wouldn't it? I'm gonna put this in my backpack. All right. So basically, you go from a time period before 1444, most people couldn't read. Well, after 1444, it's not like all of a sudden everybody could read, but books were more and more readily available. So within several generations, people went from 95% of people were illiterate to about 60, 70% of people could read. Well, that's a huge difference. And when more people can read, more people gain what? Knowledge. And by gaining knowledge, we go into a time period called, no, we're in the middle of the Renaissance when it comes up, when that's invented. But what's the chapter we're getting ready to read? The Enlightenment. Now the light bulb turns on. And that light bulb is knowledge. Actually, knowledge. The K is silent, but a lot of people didn't know that. But if they had had a Gutenberg Press readily available, maybe they would have known. All right. So now I'm going to, this part here is a little bit more in detail. Okay. 476 was the fall of the Roman Empire. Remember, that was Odoacer defeating the Romans, and then he establishes himself as the king of Italy. Never calls himself a king, but that was, for all intents and purposes, he was the king of Italy. Rome had ruled much of Europe. Now much of the land would fall into confusion as local kings and rulers fought each other to gain power. This is the beginning of the Dark Ages. Okay. Then we see a lot of those areas like Gaul, those Frankish kings, they start fighting each other. Clovis was a king who actually unites most of the Frankish tribes, the Gaul tribes. Okay. Then I did tell you about this guy. The next guy was the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He was born in 570. Well, we know that Islam comes from Muhammad and his visions. Well, he spreads throughout the land. They take much of northern Africa. They take Spain, and they're going into France. But what happens when they go into France? Yes, and that was called, and that was in 732. That was the Battle of Tours. Okay, Tours. Looks like, we're going on tours. No, the Battle of Tours. The Franks defeat the Muslims, and they push them back into Spain. Okay. Now, 800 was this guy we talked about in class. Remember, he was the last of the Holy Roman Emperors. What was his name? Charlemagne. Good. He was the king of Franks. He was the Holy Roman Emperor, which is sort of funny because he wasn't even in Italy, but he was a Roman emperor. And he wasn't really expanding, so he shouldn't have been an emperor, right? Okay, Charlemagne united much of Western Europe and is considered to be the father of the French and German monarchies. In 835, this is where it starts to get really interesting, because if you guys... I know a lot of people, especially older kids, are playing that Assassin's Creed Valhalla right now with the Vikings, and Vikings is on television. That show Vikings, and then there's like in modern pop culture right now, Vikings are like a really hot thing. Like even in heavy metal, which I'm a metalhead, you guys all know that. There's a band called Amon Amarth, and they sing a lot about Viking history. Okay, so in 835, Vikings from the Scandinavian countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they began to invade Europe, northern parts of Europe, right? And they do this until they finally get defeated by an English king, right? And in almost, yes, sir?
Weren't the Vikings also like the first white peoples to go into North America?
Well, that is they definitely were in North America along like Newfoundland, that area. So yeah, they definitely were. But now we're actually finding more and more evidence that the Chinese were probably even there before that. Okay, in 896, Alfred the Great. Anybody hear of him? He was an English king who defeats the Vikings. Okay, he doesn't push them all completely out. Basically, he defeats them as an army, so they start to blend in. The Vikings that were living there, they intermarry with the Anglo-Saxons, and you've all heard of that term before, right? Anglia was an area in England. Okay, and so a lot of the Vikings that were living there, they intermarried. Okay, now in 1066, this is the date. Remember, I told you guys, I said from the Dark Ages, and then there was into the Middle Ages. Okay, the first part of the Dark Ages, we probably would say that probably ended around 1066. And the reason why I pointed that date out is this is one of the most famous dates you will see in your life. Okay, it is when William of Normandy he was William of Hastings. He was a French duke. He actually invades England, and he wins The famous battle is called the Battle of Hastings. He becomes the King of England, okay, and he defeats the armies, the Anglo-Saxon armies. Now, only 30 years later, you're going to see the first of the Crusades. You remember the term the Crusades?
Yeah.
That was when we saw like Christian and Muslim wars over what we call the Holy Land in Christianity and Judaism and Islam. They all consider Jerusalem and that part of the Middle East, they consider that a very holy land. And so you did see, you saw several crusades. Richard the Lionheart is returning home from one of the crusades, gets captured and is held in Germany. And it's pretty cool because I actually got to go to the castle where he was held.
Really?
Yeah, Trafel. So I got to see the room he was actually in. So that was pretty neat. And he becomes King of England. He's one of the most famous kings of all time, too. And you guys have all heard the story, the tales of Robin Hood.
Yeah.
That would have been about that time period. He would have been a contemporary of Richard the Lionheart. Okay. And then on the other side of the world, I shouldn't say on the other side of the world, and the continent over in Asia, guess who is starting to come to power at this time? A guy by the name of Chingus Khan.
Oh, yeah.
You ever hear of Chingus Khan before? Or as some people call him Genghis Khan. His real name was probably pronounced more like Chingus, like a CH, like Chingus Khan. And he was becoming, like the Mongols, they were becoming an empire, getting bigger and stronger. They were riding horses. They were not sedentary people. They moved around. What do you call people that move around? It begins with an N. Nomads. Yep. And they didn't have permanent housing. You know, they lived in. Remember, we talked about yurts in the beginning of the year. They lived in yurts. By the year 1215, King John of England signs the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta probably doesn't mean anything to you right now, but after I tell you this, then you're probably going to appreciate it more. This document gives some rights and said that the king was not above the law. Basically, for many, 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 many years, well, I'm the king because God wills it, and you must listen to me. You had absolute monarchies. Well, you're going to continue to have absolute monarchies after that, but the kings had to now respect the rights of the citizens. Now, does it mean every citizen? No. Does it mean every woman? No. At the time, basically the citizens were the people, the men who had land. Sound familiar? Think all the way back to Athens, right? Okay, and this is what, 1,500 years later, 1,600 years later, and they're still going through the same things. Okay, 1271, here's another name. Very, very familiar to you, I'm sure. You ever hear of a guy by the name of Marco Polo?
Yes.
Okay, and not just the guy in the pool. Marco! Scusi? No, not that guy. That was around the time when he was going along the Silk Road to China. A lot of people said, well, no. He didn't really do that. Those were all just rumors and conjecture. Yeah, but there was a German historian who found in some history books where it's pretty proven now that Marco Polo, a lot of his stories were very true. 1337, the 100 Years' War begins between England and France for control of the French throne. 1347, the first Black Death, begins in Europe. This horrible disease would kill around half of the people in Europe. Think about that for a minute. Half the people. Black Death. Look around the room. What do we get? 10 people in here? 12? 11 people in here, so probably 5. Well, are you including me?
Yeah.
Okay, so 11 people, and half would die.
5 or 6.
Yeah, 5 or 6 people would die. All right. Now, 1431. Here's another name you should be familiar with. A woman by the name of Joan of Arc. So she's executed. She was only 19 years old when they burned her to death.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she was
Yeah.
like
14.
Wasn't she like taking the place of man or something?
Well, Joan of Arc was a really interesting character, and I don't want to get off topic because I could talk about Joan of Arc for a while. But she had visions from I believe it was I forget which angel. I think it must have been Michael the Archangel. And anyway, she was a general. She led troops into battle, and she was known to fight side by side with a lot of the men. And she was captured by the English and burned to death. In 1444, remember what I said? What was created in 1444?
The Gutenberg Press?
The Gutenberg Press. Very good. Do you know when I was in Germany, I actually got to see one? It was so cool. Let's see. And that is basically the beginning of what? What did I say?
The Enlightenment.
Oh, not the Enlightenment, but
Renaissance?
Renaissance. Okay. And then that's going to lead into the Enlightenment, right? Okay. 1453. Wow, 1453. That is finally when the Ottoman Empire defeats the city of Constantinople, and that's the last of the remaining Roman power. Okay, and then 1482, the Last Supper is painted by Leonardo da Vinci. Very good. So that is basically your Middle Ages timeline. I hope that helps you guys out, maybe to understand that a little bit better.